Well, for me, creativity is the capacity to create novelty. This may be new shapes in art or design, new ideas, new approaches to problems, whatever the novelty is, the ability to create novelty, to me, that's the very essence of creativity.
Okay, and a lot of academics, they would argue that there has to be value as well. It can't just be novelty, because if there is novelty, originality, and there is no value, there's no benefit or usefulness, then we can't really call that creativity.
Well, I would not agree with that. First of all, let me say that in my work, I extend the notion of creativity to all of life, not just to human life, but to all of life. And let me elaborate on this a little bit. As you know, over the last 30 years, I have developed a synthesis of a new conception of life that is now emerging in science. It's a synthesis that integrates the biological dimension of life with the cognitive, the social, and the ecological dimension.
Innovation embodies also the value that you get from the value that you get from this something new. So you cannot have innovation without creativity. It's not possible. It's something new. You imagine something new, and it's something new that is applied. It happens. It's not just imagination. But innovation is what makes sure that it brings some value to somebody.
I think creativity is a behavior and it's an input into innovation. It's a way of behaving. It's about taking away what you currently know to be true, or about challenging what you currently know to be true, as a behavior, to be able to come up with something innovative. And innovation to me is about coming up with something completely new that creates either economic or social value.
I think if I were to think about how I originally thought of creativity as, being a gifted artist or sculptor or musician, somebody who composed music, I probably would have said it was a gift. But I think more realistically, it is a skill. It's something that we can develop. It's not something that you've either got or you haven't. And I think it's one of those things, like public speaking, that people think either they can do it or they can't, and that's it. But I think we're learning more now about the human brain and how we can develop through, I think it's called neuroplasticity. We can actually develop and continue to develop skills.
It's a continuum. It's not a point on a graph. Creativity is like a curve, and different people are at different places on that graph.
Well, I think creativity is certainly a gift. Creativity is natural and something everyone has access to, but within that there are certain gifts, like someone may have an orientation or a gift towards music or writing poetry, and they discover that gift at an early stage and develop it. But I think the creativity is working behind that. So it's not the creativity that's a gift. Well, that is a gift. That's the gift of life.
On that note, everyone's creativity is different. So what one person may define as creative will be very different to another person's creativity. So one person might think creativity is like colouring and doing things with objects and things. Another person might say creativity is imagining things or taking things away and really reflecting on things. Another person might think journaling is creative. So it's very different.
Regurgitated it is such a negative word, and I know what you mean as well. Do you know what? I really don't know who said it, but probably several people, that there's really nothing new under the sun. So I've found that because of the internet and because of the availability and accessibility of information, people can spread their message widely. Things get retweeted and shared, and they go viral. And so then everybody sees more and more and more, so they have access to more and more and exposed to so many things. And I think that it's more difficult than ever to be creative with your own ideas and insights, if indeed you can even call them your own ideas and insights.
There's perhaps a confusion between creativity and level of achievement, that we only recognize creativity if it's at some extraordinarily high level of achievement. So we think of classic artists, great artists, as being the epitome of creativity, and forget that, well, we can be creative but not very good at something. So children, for example, are not accomplished at art, let's say painting or singing or drawing or theatre, but they're very creative at it, they're very playful, and we're not holding them to a high standard because we don't have to expect that of them. They're not professional artists or professional creatives. So if we think of creativity as belonging to all of us and something that can be exemplified at any level of achievement, then it opens the door for us to all try whatever we want to try, find what we're good at, find what we want to practice at, and realise more of our own potential.
And only then, when you are writing because you want to support and inspire others, not because you want to vent or get your own back on the page, when you're writing because of other people. So I think it's quite easy for diary writing to feel quite narcissistic. That isn't what we want for anything to be useful. It cannot be self-indulgent or narcissistic. It has to be with the goal of supporting somebody else. So you have to step outside yourself and be away from the extreme emotion of the event in order to do that effectively.
If I were to rephrase it, I would say creativity and productivity can be interchanged to a certain extent. But then again, there are people who disagree with that.
One starts with imagination as a primal capacity that humans have, and it's a distinctly human capacity. And in that capacity of being able to, in one's mind's eye, if you will, envision what isn't, what doesn't exist, what if, why not, that has been a propelling impetus throughout the millennia. So if one starts with imagination, then the question becomes, what the heck is this faculty? And one wants to understand how our understanding of it from a meta point of view has evolved. And so I've spent time researching the history of how different periods have understood this faculty.
Oh my goodness, mindset is everything, really. I mean, mindset is important for everything. I don't know whether you know what we psychologists mean by mindset, but it's basically all the unconscious beliefs that drive absolutely everything in our lives. It drives the way we think, the way we feel, the way we behave. We don't use our conscious mind anything like as much as people believe. The unconscious is whirring away, driving everything. And so clearly, you know, for creativity, it's the essence of creativity. So if somebody's artistically creative or scientifically creative or creative in other ways, then that's all coming out of their unconscious mindset.
Also, I've used images quite a lot, and I really find images are really helpful to distance yourself from a challenge while also talk about it quite personally. So if you have an array of images and I ask you to introduce yourself using that image, you can explore and express so much more than you might have done if I just said, oh, just introduce yourself as you normally would have done.
I think for me, creativity is all about connections, of finding links between different areas. Sort of, I think especially where you've got sort of two different domains of knowledge, and then sort of see that link between the two, and that for me is creativity.
Creativity is a way to think about your life, about your work, and about your problem in a different way. So trying to open up your mind and try to see people from different angles. Try to have a more positive approach with problems, because problems are not really problems. Problems are just things that things that happen in your life. Nothing is ever a problem. It's just something that happens to you, and you have to find a way to face it.
It is never a linear process. So there are all these stages, but we also know that they may go from one stage to stage 3, and then back to stage 2, and then back to stage 1 again. So it's always back and forth, and it may be chaotic. So instead of really describing the process, like what stages it has, I always like more to describe what elements has the creative process.
That is a very good question. And I guess I would say that probably the phrase is a little bit misleading, in the sense that I'm less interested in the production of ideas and much more interested in the production of questions. Because I think if you ask beautiful questions, ideas come naturally. Whereas I do think that the science of creativity is very much focused on how to actually bring ideas to life.
Yeah, I mean, I think all enterprises have to solve a problem or serve some needs, and so I think they all have that in common.
We think differently at different levels of education, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that the more educated you are, the more likely you are to be able to be creative. In fact, there's actually some good research that in fact shows that the more expert you are, the less likely you are to be creative, interestingly enough.
And what are the psychological barriers?
Oh, that's a good one. I think things like our beliefs, our attitudes, mindsets, is that you mentioned mindsets earlier. Mindsets is a good one, because we can look at things like take the mindset around, I've forgotten the terms now, the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset that I think Carol Dweck wrote about. In a way, if you've got a mindset that is open to possibilities, that is open to change, that is open to growth, then you're going to be much more open to being creative, to try new things. If you have a fixed mindset which says, okay, this is it. this is what I have. This is what I'm capable of, and then you're going to shut yourself down in terms of possibilities.
But with an actor performing a piece, very often they're going to have to discover something in doing the piece that they didn't know before. And for me, that's the essence of creativity when people are working, that they seem to be able to use something that hasn't come before, and they've discovered it and then find a way of working with it.
Things we as women don't tend to play in our downtime, so to speak. It's sewing or quilting or even needlework or all kinds of things like that. There's always a purpose behind it. So I find that women have a really hard time dropping that mantle and actually doing something which is a real gift for them, giving themselves permission just to play, because it seems like a useless exercise because there's nothing that's an out product from it. But there is very much an out product, but maybe it's just not tangible in the way that they could see or put in a shopping basket.
Creativity to me is actually, if I had to say it in its essence, it's our energy in action.
I mean, as an artist, I spent many years actually struggling to find where is creativity, why have I lost it, and dealing with confidence and stuff like this. But what I realised is creativity is actually innate to every human. And it's just a matter of being in the present moment and just letting go. Call it, I don't know, how would I explain it? It's like being a satellite or a conduit. Once you let go and you just have fun and you get into this playful state, creativity just flows through you, if that makes sense.
For me, the big thing that is lacking in all of these, TED Talks on creativity and the massive amounts of books on how to be more creative is the piece that's missing is recognizing the spontaneous thought.
Number one, reducing stress in the business world, that playfulness. Number two, the sense of humor, for whatever reason, helped me break through some barriers in terms of getting people to move to a different space and getting them to feel comfortable. And number three, to establish trust with the people that I was working with. I found that the humor side of things reduced the tension and helped create a common bond with my colleagues, with my clients.
In my work, I work with a lot of people. I work with a lot of individuals, and I work with a lot of teams. And I'd say it's worth for me splitting the two. With individuals, as private clients, what I look for is when was their creativity or their creative spirit or their spark, when was that broken, or when was that damaged or taken away or pushed under to do the right thing. And it's really important to find where and when to help them get it back, because I find that that is very, very often the driving force when people who are passionate about their work or on purpose, that's the thing that fuels them. And I'd much prefer someone who is fueled by a lust for life, by a real hunger to achieve what they want to do, than someone who's fueled by pain.
That's we need to be able to be the most relaxed in order to access that part of the brain that we generally don't access when we go about our day. So we function mainly through our sympathetic nervous system, which keeps us on the alert all the time and makes us do things that are in a logical way. So we apply our logic pretty much constantly throughout the day. And yoga and meditation allows us to completely relax so that the parasympathetic nervous system can come in and the dream state almost can be recreated, but with us being awake. And when we are in that state, which is more our kind of subconscious state, that's when ideas and new connections are made by the brain that get us to see things in a different way compared to when we just examine them with our logic hats on.
I believe that actually tapping into our creative force every single day is something which is essential for us. It keeps us alive. It keeps the energy flowing. There's a theory that it also delays the onset of age-related diseases, dementia and that sort of thing. So
generally, I think we could harness and utilize much more the body in the creative process.
Now, if you're not sleeping well, for example, you're not going to remember things. You're not going to be as productive the next day. But also, interestingly enough, when you learn something, and I was reading a study just recently, and you slept well the first 2 nights, but then didn't sleep well the third or fourth night, it still made you lose a lot of that the ability to commit that task. So things like sleep, where people are not thinking, okay, how's that associated to creativity? But actually.
But yeah, I 100% think that sleep is correlated to creativity. If you don't get enough sleep, then you're either too busy thinking about how you haven't had enough sleep to then be creative, or your mind can be quite fuzzy. And I think
not think, you can't, it's not what you think, it's what comes to you. Because I would say, whilst many people have a visual image, as we know, a lot of people have a physical reaction, and they're much more likely to ignore the physical reaction and see the image. And an image, because we're bombarded with a lot of positive images, particularly on the internet, they're more likely to get this lovely positive image, have a horrible reaction, and then they're thinking about how their dad used to, you know, dock their pocket money every time they tripped over or something, and that they think every time they make a mistake, they got to pay for it with money. And so they end up, you know, so there's all that kind of psychology in there. And I would love psychologists to tackle it more, but they don't. And nobody's doing it. You know, very few people are doing it. There are a few money coaches that look at it, but it's not a particularly common thing. Whereas when you think how many financial advisors there are, or how many counsellors there are dealing with other aspects of our life, for me, it's a missing area that I wish people would address, particularly with people who are creative, artists, musicians, because they really are the ones that we want to be successful. Because if we had more art and music and theatre and all that in the world, it'd be great.
Often we think that, you know, theories can give people everything that they need to become great leaders. But the reality is that, you know, creativity and leadership, it's actually a very emotional education. It's an emotional form of education, and it's about helping people to get in touch with their purpose, who they are, and to be able to act from that kind of emotional.
I went into the room, and of course there's all these folded arms, and you know, you could feel the vibes. So because there's no point trying to teach people anything if that's the energy that they're in. So just by way of introduction, I said, look, why don't each of us go around the room and share a story about yourself, something in your life that the people you work with wouldn't know. And it was just incredible. These stories started coming out, and suddenly people were relaxing, and we just moved to a completely different energy. And so that
the whole culture, it's effect on the cultures is very significant, because every individual brings the energy into the whole. The part reflects the whole reflects the part. So when we come with all the anxiety that modern world brings into our life, all the turbulence, all the inner agitation, we bring it into society, we bring it into groups. When we have opportunity to transcend it through creative work or through meditation, which is its own creative work, it's a dive into creation in a way. So and art, for a lot of people, creativity, the process of creativity is ultimately meditation. That's exactly when we transcend the mind, transcend the ego to a degree that anybody can, depending what they are in life at the moment. We are falling away as individual beings. We are falling away, and we come in very pure. It's as if our soul is speaking.
I think it comes from looking, and this is where artists and scientists they've developed this skill to be able to notice things. So this is, again, and I realize that also being outside, going for a walk, being amongst the trees, simply looking up and noticing the line of a leaf as it hits the blue sky. It's that sort of looking. So I don't think it matters where you are. I mean, I will get really inspired just watching a TV program.
You know, I'll get ideas in meditation or in the creative writing, and then I'll look for signs. You know, animals crossing my path, or I'm driving along and I see a signpost with a message on, or, you know, there are so many little hints that you can become aware of if you look for them, of course, you know. So that's, I think mindfulness is something that people talk a lot about today, isn't it? So I try to be mindful about even the little things that are happening around me.
And then when you're in business, traditional business, you get dictated by external goals and pressures, and you know, traditional business is driven by profit. And so, you know, you have all of these time scales and budgets, and that can become, you know, you have to achieve X, Y, Z by this point. And so you then disconnect from your own inner wisdom and your own inner rhythm, and you become dictated to by, you know, an external pressure. And because we're not taught this, you then become on the hamster wheel and you become busy, and before you know it, you've kind of, you know, you're going down the motorway at 90 miles an hour and you can't stop. And that's what I've learned. That's why I love working now. When I left the Homeless World Cup, I looked at burnout and how I'd come to burnout, and I had a lot of shame around it as well initially, which was, you know, that I shouldn't have burnt out. I should have known better. I should have been able to manage myself better, and all of those things. And I watched a wonderful documentary by Pixar, and in Toy Story 2, the whole team burnt out and couldn't work for a whole year.
And I call it natural resistance because it's the resistance found in all of nature. You know, it's where the shell of an egg bumps up when the chick is ready to be born, bumps up against a new birth. So there's a natural dynamic tension, a resistance between trying to maintain the status quo and the new birth. So that is a pattern of emergence. that there's going to be a dynamic tension between one part trying to maintain and one part trying to be born. And that happens individually with us. It shows up, you know, when all of a sudden you have a great idea or some kind of new paradigm idea for yourself, and then you have all this resistance telling you why it won't work. It happens in organizations and it happens in nature. So my view is, rather than seeing it as a bad thing and fighting it, it's seeing it as part of the natural creative emergent process and learning to work with it. The same way a mother birthing a baby learns to work with both the contractions and the expansion, you know, as the baby is being born. I find that that's one of the patterns.
Some mistakes cost people more dearly than others. And I think it's about really distinguishing recklessness away from creativity that happens to maybe have not gone the way, or risk-taking, recklessness versus risk-taking. So what we promote is very much considered thinking, understanding the end point of what you want out of whatever your activity is, understanding that, you know, you do have to have some form of responsibility and risk-taking, but then also look at, well, if it doesn't go right, what am I going to do about fixing things? And I think it's also about communicating that, okay, I am going to be trying to do this with the intention of this output, but if it doesn't go right, this is how I'm going to fix it. I think once you communicated that, very often you've let people know that you're prepared. And I think it's unlikely that, you know, being fired may occur. However, you know, in the cases where it does, then it's also about then learning about the, you know, the culture in which you express your creativity possibly matters just as much.
And my early career, I worked in youth prisons for the New York State youth prison system. And I can tell you, most of those boys were incredibly creative, and they were willing to take some risks, you know, and the ones I worked with were the ones who got caught, you know, failed in their risks, you know. So, you know, creativity is value neutral, but obviously we want to work with a health promotion kind of thing. So within a positive ethical standard. And when we do that, and so, you know, the good folks, you know, are applying these skills, then that's a good thing. Good companies, good people, good social causes, good ethical values combined with good innovation skills. That's nice for us all.
Yes, absolutely. They haven't been effective in using their creativity in the normal sense of the word. They're very creative of being entrepreneurs on the streets, but not in a way that's going to help to progress their lives, in a way that, you know, whatever we call the norm in society is acceptable. Selling drugs and they know how to do that very well. So one of the things that I did when the first initial work went on the blackboard, and they said, we can't do this, I said, yes, you can. Mm-hmm. Just think of what you do. And we're not going to be discussing drugs or how you sell it, but who are your customers? Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do you sort of mark out what you want? How do you get your money in? And I went, oh, so.
A prime example recently is when Elon Musk sent one of his cars into space. Now, you would think that he wouldn't need publicity, but because he's so big in the world anyway. But it captured people's imaginations, and so he's using creativity at an incredible pace, and he's probably one of the most creative people in the world today. But that's an example of how you can use creativity in various different ways.
And it's also an example of ethics, because some people would argue, how ethical is it to send a car into space? What will be the impact of that? Is it going to have a positive impact, or could there be negative impacts of doing things like that we don't know what the actual outcome is going to be? What, you know, how is that going to?
There will always be naysayers.
There is a tendency to actually jump from problem identification to actually solution. So not enough time actually spent defining more creatively what those problems are and synthesizing those issues. I think there's a tendency for people to be more action-oriented and come up with short-term fixes.
And the workshop creates an open space and a safe space for people to take risks, to risk being creative in the moment and actually being witnessed in it, not in a religious sort of way, but actually witnessed, being seen.
I think we worry too much about objective measures. I mean, you were mentioning lesson observation, for example. If you look at Professor Robert Coe's research on lesson observation systems, very extensive work in America, where they trained up lesson observers very, very rigorously indeed, much more rigorously than would normally be the case in the UK with lesson observations that were done in the college. And they found that the judgments being made by the lesson observers were not reliable. Because, you know, what goes on in a lesson, it's incredibly difficult to judge a teacher by just looking at half an hour or an hour of their work. Very often a lot of what a teacher does, as you will know, is done outside of the class contact time. It's when you're marking work or when you're talking to a student in the corridor. Or, and so, you know, we've got many means of judging teachers, like their pass rates, the retention, you know, whether the students enjoy their lessons. You know, those are far, because they look at those factors, look at the whole of the teaching over a year or a term at least, it's much more reliable than just a 1 hour visit.
You know, we talk about gifted and talented students, we talk about gifted and talented learners, most able learners, but I think the best way for them to actually be in a position to achieve their own potential or go further, possibly, it's being creative, it's being innovative. But without the standards in place first, you can't really do that because you need to have some kind of a framework to be able to do that, I believe.
We seem to have a narrative right now which is very much about STEM. Which is very much obviously science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and I think I have to be very careful with that because it's great. Like, yes, we should invest in all of that, and we should invest in creativity. For me, it shouldn't be an either-or equation, and at the moment, it seems to be an either-or equation. There's some narrative or some belief, you know, out there, which is creativity seems frivolous somehow or unnecessary. Surplus to requirements. If we need to cut budgets, let's cut budgets around creativity because the most essential things are STEM derived.
There is no time given for them to really focus on it, so they are having to do it in their own time. Sometimes the great results and the great findings, there is no enthusiasm or interest from the organizations in using that. And I think in our sector as a whole as well, I think sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot. We have and we generate really wonderful things, but they tend to fizzle out. And that can be a damper on creativity. So it only then always will be a handful of people who will continue to want to do and you know, improve and develop themselves.
I thought, well, you know, I'm not going to be constrained in writing fiction like I was in my non-fiction book. I'm going to just, you know, let it flow, pour it out, do the kind of, you know, what is generally thought of as creative kind of writing. So I did. I wrote, you know, the best part of a manuscript, a first draft, and I was so pleased with it that I sent it to an agent, a writer's agent that I knew quite well, and I hoped that she would say, well, of course it's wonderful, I'll take it on. But unfortunately I got a letter back from her within a couple of weeks saying, Lucy, your book is both boring and unbelievable. Not things I wanted to hear at all. So I was kind of like, what? How can this be? How can it be unbelievable? This is part of my life. I've based this on reality. But she gave me a very salutary lesson. And she said to me, you know, real life is not the same as writing fiction. You actually need to plan and structure.
I think one of the most important things for a trained facilitator is not only to be specialized in a set of tools and techniques, but especially know when and where to use and not to use something, and when to adapt to the context they're facing. So there's a saying, as you know, I'm from Brazil, and we have a saying there that it goes somewhat like this: for people who own a hammer, everything they see is a nail, right? So if you only own one tool you're going to want to use it for everything you see. And I think that's a trap in the case of creativity or creative facilitators. You need to own a big toolbox, and more than that, know when to use, know which tool to use for the job you need, and also know how to refine and recreate your own tools often.
Wow, that's a very, very interesting question. So I think they can go hand in hand, because I would say that there are whole areas of the world where communication skills and creativity go hand in hand. I'll give you an example. Take musicians. If you take songwriters like Bob Dylan or David Bowie, they're the immediate ones that spring to mind, but there's many, many others. They are obviously incredible creatives, and at the same time incredible communicators, which is why they've got a platform. So I think they can go hand in hand.
Going through the Second World War, you could argue that Europe is now in a much stronger position because of going through that destruction. It then was able to redesign from that horrific process, but what it did is it allowed them to recreate their society. So yeah, I think destruction can sometimes be a powerful foundation for creativity to then take hold, to redesign something in a more positive fashion. So context, like you say, it's very important. Absolutely.
The arts are in a category that most people would, I think most people see as not being that important, not that useful to society, because it doesn't earn money, in a traditional way. And nobody can see the direct benefit of art other than people like it and put it on the wall. Whereas I think it has a far greater benefit.
When I looked at the first point is that our minds need to be evolved enough. Then I discovered that there's a correlation with the consciousness level that an individual has.
A lot of people's ideas of creativity are that if you're not artistic or arts-based, you have no skill with a pencil or things like that, you're not really creative. But it's actually about a way of thinking, a way of putting things together, and a way of approaching things. So for me, in order to reach disadvantaged groups, it's working on the premise that they don't create their disadvantage, more that the systems we have in place are not suitable for the diversity of needs that we as human beings have. So I look at it in terms of how can we use creative approaches to enable them to access the provision that they couldn't access previously. So that may well be in how things are planned, how things are developed, as well as having creative activities which may be based from a forum theatre perspective or visual art perspective.
We all have the ability to be creative in different ways. And we talk about personality types, and there's some personalities that we might think of people just doing things, being asked to do what to do, and to be just doing things in a strict manner without thinking outside of the box. The reality is most people in the right environment will be creative in their own way if given the opportunity. So as you said, when it comes to teams, the key is there is a great value in having different people with different ways of thinking and expressing themselves. But the key is to give them the opportunity to be able to do so in their own unique way, making room for that.
I'll go for the best person for the job because actually they look like me. And that obviously excludes a huge swathe of people and their talents. It's trying to persuade employers to take that risk and to be, like as you say, to be creative, to be exciting, and to just take a risk on somebody and say, you know, sort of, well, yes, I like their attitude, I can teach them everything else.
And diversity. I think that's very important to creativity. We know that when people are in touch with many diverse other people and other styles, they can become more creative. It's not always easy to be with people who are diverse from you, but creativity is nurtured by diversity.
I was in the public sector for almost, well, about 18 years actually.
I hope it's changed now. I'm not sure if it has, but when I was there, creativity was stifled. And I've found when I started working in the private sector, people are much more open and more appreciative of what creativity can do. So I think there is a real difference between private and public sector, because businesses know that to create the next new thing or to stay on top of your competitors, you have to be creative. And I think with the public sector, they have different pressures. It's more about saving money, cutting costs, rather than creating anything new. And I wish the public sector were a bit more into creativity, because I think it would just, I don't think they appreciate the value of it so much.
Right. But he would say, the story about him scribbling on a napkin and somebody came up to him and said, "Can I have that?" And he said, "Yeah, for $1 million." And they were appalled, but it was like, well, how did I get from here to here? It was all the years, the whatever angst I went through, it was all the learning I had to do, all those pieces. So who am I to say, if you think about, she wrote Harry Potter, she scribbled it on a napkin. It was just notes.
J.K. Rowling.
Thank you. I couldn't think at the moment, but J.K. Rowling, that's the idea again, is scribbling with words, but look what she's done and accomplished from those scribbles. So
it's crucial. It's absolutely crucial, because so much of the work that we used to do is now being automated, or it's being done in, I'm talking about the West here, it's being done in countries like India or the Philippines. That kind of sort of left brain work is being outsourced. So what's left? It's the creative work, it's ideas.
Creativity is something which comes through collaboration. So what happens in Japanese school is like there is a lot of peer-to-peer collaboration which is happening over the day.
General creativity with horses and with my life means change, being open to change and being open to new things.
And actually met the so-called locals, or the local Indian tribe called the Mapuches. And I don't know what happened. It had to be real change. Just seeing those people, how they act and how they actually were treating each other with respect, and overall energy of the place completely changed me.
No, I don't think we need external validation at all. I think actually creativity is all about going within. And if the moment, and we're too busy trying to please others, trying to fit in boxes, the moment we stop doing that and getting that external validation is when our creativity really flows. That's when we hit that authenticity. Yes, do it for yourself. Absolutely do it for yourself. Yes, you are creative, just doing it for you. A lot of my creativity, so I'm also a fine artist. The moment I started producing work for me and no one else, everything expanded within me and I was able to reach more people. I began to realise that I was actually creating for others.
And we've been looking together at how we can help local people to start projects by just creating the simple platforms for that to happen. So things like having a space to use, things like insurance being there in the background so that people don't need to set up complicated governance arrangements just to get together to do some knitting or singing or something. So the interest for funders, I hope, is in this ecosystem, this web of interesting and varied but quite small projects that people are co-designing themselves and making come alive through their existing skills and knowledge and through sharing skills and knowledge with each other.
Yes, because if you live in the same place, in your same city for all your life, so I think you are more a close mentality. You see things working in the same way, pretty much. But like living in different countries, you see different changes, different mentality of the people. The people are different, and you see the different ways of doing things, and that makes you to have more ideas, to be more creative. Like when you live in different countries, so at that time yes, you have different ideas, and sometimes you can combine, like, okay, these things I like from this part of the world, they are doing this, and in another city they are doing that, and and this makes you more to have more ideas. And
some anthropology is all about change. So the evolutionary origins of mankind is all about how we transition fundamentally from an animal species, if you like, to a human species through the origins of what we call culture, which is the same thing as the origins of creativity. You know, when did we start using grammatical language? When did we start making art using symbolism, having morality that transcended just sort of person-to-person groups and actually encompassed an entire society? When did we start developing complex, sophisticated tools? All of these things that we associate with culture with a capital C are about creativity. How did we solve these problems in the environment that enabled us actually to spread across the globe 50,000, 100,000 years ago?
Yeah, the purpose of these conversations is just to see, like, what is it that we are absolutely clear about, and what is it that is still kind of like a little bit ambiguous, that we still need to discuss further. So it's through discussions and through conversation that we know what is you know, common sense for those of us who are interested in creativity, and what is you know, maybe converting that common sense to good sense, you know, and that requires a lot of reflection, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm all these things are going through my mind. What are we clear about? What are we not clear about? I mean, sometimes I feel like I know a lot. Sometimes I feel like I know nothing at all. And I think actually it's good to be humble and to recognize that we only know what we know. We don't know what we don't know. And you always need to be open to the possibility that you probably don't have all the information. Right. And if you hold that as a thought, then you actually are more willing to accept more information, which may actually mean that you actually have to change your position. So it's a moving feast.
I would say, just like we don't all do everything well in daily life, that the same is true for creativity. I believe there are people that can excel at a lot of things, but I don't think everyone's highly creative in all things. I think we generally steer towards those things which greatly interest us, or for which we have the most you know, natural giftedness. And I don't think everyone's gifted in every way. So I think the same would be true of creativity.
To be an entrepreneur, you have to have an idea, and then you have to have that passion for that idea and strong belief when hundreds and thousands of people around you dragging you down and saying, what on earth are you doing? You have to have that strong belief. You have to have that dream to say, no, this will work, and I will make it work. Entrepreneurs are willing to risk, if necessary, all they have in order to achieve their dream.
It's about the implementation of the creative idea. So in the innovation process, the people taking charge of the innovation process already screen through the different creative idea and only choose those creative ideas which they think have more potential to be successful in the market. Mm-hmm. So this is the first reason I can think of that makes the companies and even the government or the funding body to support more of the innovation project than the creativity project.
Certainly, a certain amount of resourcefulness is required, unless you've got everything at your disposal, which most of us haven't. You need to be resourceful. You need to be determined, and you need to have a plan. You need to have an idea as to how you're going to materialize your thoughts into a product or a service.
Would you agree with me that creativity needs to begin with a strong vision?
Oh God, yes. I think all companies have to, all those that want to be successful have to be led by somebody at the top that has a vision. Because without a vision, your employees haven't a clue where they're going, or whether they even want to go there, or buy into it. And obviously that keeps them all motivated.
Part of sisu also, sisu is a Finnish word meaning going against the odds, and
just trying again and making it happen. And entrepreneurship in school, I think I could give an example. It's like the kids that you can give them both short-term goals and long-term goals. And it means that they need to finish it. I mean, sometimes they run even one-year projects. I know this school, they made this recipe book, and the project lasted for a year, and they worked a lot, but they still did it. So it's more setting up goals and going for them and doing that, no matter what, no excuses.
A couple of months ago, I asked the woman who started it, I said, where did you get the name No-So? What does that mean? And she said it's short for nothing, something for nothing, something from nothing.
Okay.
And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, I had this dream for years to start my own little coffee shop with a focus on positivity, with a place where people could come and connect and be reminded that they're a soul with a human experience, not a human with a soul, and where we'd have loving and kindness and friendship and communication and all good things. And I said, that's a great idea. She said, yeah, well, it started invisibly with an idea and a dream I had, and here it is. Now we have it. So I've created something from nothing.